He was a genius with a guitar, a pioneer who bent the rules of rock, and a man whose sound could silence a stadium. Jeff Beck was in a league of his own. But behind the roaring amps and Grammy-winning riffs, there's a hidden side to his story that few have seen until now. In today's video, we uncover the haunting truth about Jeff Beck's abandoned house, the fate of his priceless classic car collection, and the sad, quiet end that stunned fans around the world. With a net worth of $25 million left behind, questions still linger. Where did it all go? And who was really there in his final days? Stay tuned until the end, because the most chilling and emotional details about this rock legend's final chapter are something you won't want to miss. Jeff Beck's story begins on June 24, 1944, in the quiet town of Wallington, Surrey, England. A.E., birthplace that seems almost too still and quaint to have produced one of the most incendiary guitarists in rock history. Born to the Beck family, young Jeff grew up alongside his sister Annetta in a post-war Britain that was rebuilding itself, unaware that its musical landscape was about to be shaken to its core by talents like his. As a child, Beck's voice was his first instrument. He sang in the local church choir, likely unaware that the sacred harmonies echoing off those stone walls would one day give way to the snarling, electrified wails of a Fender Stratocaster. His early education took him through Sutton Manor School and then Sutton East County Secondary Modern School, where, one imagines, the standard curriculum struggled to compete with the sounds already forming in his head. Eventually, Beck found himself at the Wimbledon College of Arts. It was a fitting place for someone whose eventual artistry would defy classification. While the college honed his visual creativity, it was outside the classroom, in clubs and pubs across England, that his musical identity really took root. Here, the academic world bled into the late-night chaos of Britain's emerging rock scene. By 1962, Beck had found his way into Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages, a group as wild and theatrical as their name suggests. That experience was a proper baptism into the unpredictable world of live rock and roll. The following year, always hungry for something more his own, he founded the Night Shift. A short-lived but important project, it gave him the reins and a taste of leadership. That momentum carried him through stints with the Rumbles and later the Tridents. Each new band a stepping stone, each guitar riff another stride toward the explosive sound that would soon make Jeff Beck a legend. These were the years of formation, of grit and grind, when Beck's raw talent was learning to channel itself. Before the fame, before the accolades, before the legendary solo runs and collaborations, there was just a young man, a guitar, and an irrepressible need to make it sing. In 1965, something seismic happened in the British rock scene. Jeff Beck, already a rising star with a guitar in permanent ignition mode, was tapped to replace none other than Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds. It was a bold move for the band, and a pivotal moment for Beck. The Yardbirds weren't just another rock group. They were a laboratory of innovation, a volatile breeding ground for new sounds. Beck wasn't just a substitute, he was a catalyst. Over his intense 20-month stint with them, he didn't just play guitar, he twisted it, bent it, and sent it screaming into strange and beautiful places no one had quite dared go before. During his tenure, Beck helped shape the band's most celebrated album, Roger the Engineer. It was a fever dream of fuzz, feedback, and forward motion. An album that charted at number 20 in the UK, the Yardbirds' only record to do so. Across the Atlantic, it climbed to number 52 on the Billboard 200. Not bad for a band constantly teetering between brilliance and breakdown. The single, Over, Under, Sideways, Down, became the album's signature, a psychedelic stomp laced with Beck's chaotic charm. But while his playing pushed boundaries, his behavior did the same, only less constructively. Beck's unreliability on the band's US tour eventually led to his dismissal. Rock history, it seems, has a thing for genius with a wild streak. Beck didn't sit still for long. By early 1967, he'd formed his own group, simply named the Jeff Beck Group. And what a lineup it was! Rod Stewart on vocals, Ronnie Wood on bass, Nicky Hopkins on keyboards, and Ainsley Dunbar on drums. This wasn't just a band, it was a ticking time bomb of talent. Their debut album, Truth, dropped in 1968 like a thunderclap, a proto-heavy metal milestone that peaked at number 15 on the Billboard 200 and made it clear that Beck didn't need anyone else's stage to shine. A follow-up, Beck Ola, arrived in 1969 with a looser, heavier sound, but failed to match the first album's impact. Clashing egos and mounting tensions eventually tore the group apart. Another spectacular rise and implosion in Beck's ever-turbulent journey. But again, reinvention was only a beat away. In 1971, Beck assembled a new version of the Jeff Beck Group, this time weaving in more soul, jazz, and R&B. With Bobby Tench on vocals, Max Middleton on keys, Clive Chaman on bass, and Cozy Powell on drums, this lineup was less firestorm and more groove. Their first album, Rough and Ready, signaled a departure from blues rock into funkier, more experimental territory. In 1972, a self-titled album followed, echoing the same soulful leanings and proving Beck's guitar could whisper just as powerfully as it could scream. Later that year, the shape-shifting guitarist teamed up with bassist Tim Bogert and drummer Carmine Appice to form a high-octane power trio, Beck, Bogert, and Appice. Their lone studio album, released in 1973, fused explosive energy with playful swagger. One of its standout tracks was a raw, muscular cover of Stevie Wonder's Superstition, originally written for Beck himself. It was a reminder that even amidst shifting styles, Beck's guitar voice remained unmistakable. The trio burned, bright and fast. By early 1974, after a notable performance at London's Rainbow Theatre, they too unraveled. Jeff Beck's solo career didn't begin with a bang. It began with a ripple that would echo through rock history. In 1966, while still tangled in the chaos of the Yardbirds, he quietly dropped his first solo single, Beck's Bolero, an instrumental that was anything but quiet in tone. Haunting, cinematic, and thunderously melodic, the track showcased not just his guitar prowess, but his ability to tell a story without a single word. It was a prelude to the vast, unpredictable journey ahead. After parting ways with the Yardbirds, in 1967, Beck released a couple of quirky, psychedelic-tinged singles, Hi-Ho Silver Lining and Tallyman, that offered glimpses of a restless creative spirit not quite interested in playing to the charts. Then, after years of group projects and sonic exploration, he re-emerged in 1975 with a work that would become his crown jewel, Blow by Blow. An entirely instrumental album, it fused jazz elegance with rock swagger and climbed all the way to number 4 on the Billboard 200, his highest charting release ever. The following year's Wired saw him doubling down on fusion, this time adding a sharper, more electronic edge. It landed at number 16, cementing Beck as a guitar visionary unbound by genre. The journey didn't slow down. In 1980, Beck dropped, There and Back, once again defying expectation with a mix of synths and sizzling solos. Then came a turn back toward mainstream rock in 1985 with Flash, an album that featured Rod Stewart lending his unmistakable vocals to their hit cover of People. Get ready! It was a nostalgic reunion and a radio success. But Beck, true to form, retreated from the spotlight again before returning with Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop in 1989, a raw, muscular album that was equal parts grit and precision. The 1990s saw Beck pushing boundaries in new directions. In 1999, he released Who Else?, dipping his toe into the world of guitar-driven electronica. The experimentation continued with You Had It Coming in 2000 and Jeff in 2003, albums that sounded like what might happen if a blues legend collided with a futuristic glitch machine. Then, after a 7-year silence, Beck roared back with Emotions and Commotion in 2010. This time, he blended orchestral arrangements with searing guitar work. The result was not only beautiful, but award-winning. His performances of Hammerhead and a moving rendition of Nessun Dorma both earned him Grammys. His final studio album, Loud Hailer, arrived in 2016. Loud, politically charged, and fiercely contemporary, proving that even in his 70s, Beck wasn't done evolving. But the albums were only part of his story. Beck was a collaborator. By instinct, a musical shapeshifter who seemed drawn to unusual pairings and unpredictable projects. In 1981, he joined forces with Eric Clapton, his Yardbirds predecessor, for a series of live Amnesty International shows that were immortalized in both film and album. In the early 90s, his fiery solo lit up John Bon Jovi's Blaze of Glory, and his guitar lent edge and elegance to the Days of Thunder film score. That decade became a whirlwind of guest appearances, lending his fretwork to Roger Waters's solo material, adding texture to Kate Bush's ethereal soundscapes, popping up on albums by Beverly Craven and Paul Rodgers, and co-composing the score for the Australian miniseries Frankie's House with Jed Lieber. In a detour only Beck would take, he joined the Big Town Playboys for Crazy Legs, a swinging tribute to 1950s rockabilly icon Gene Vincent. Into the 2000s, Beck kept surprising. He appeared on the Toots and the Maytals track 5446 Was My Number, injected his energy into a star-studded version of Imagine for Herbie Hancock's The Imagine Project in 2010, and even shared the stage and studio with Beach Boys mastermind Brian Wilson. One of his final collaborations may have been his most unexpected. During the isolating spring of 2020, Beck and actor-musician Johnny Depp teamed up to release a cover of John Lennon's Isolation. It struck a chord in a world on pause. That musical chemistry led to a full collaborative album, 18, released in 2022. It was a curious, genre-bending project that defied logic and convention, just like Jeff Beck himself. For Beck, music was never just a career, it was a chase for the next sound, the next feeling, the next idea that hadn't quite been formed yet. From the roaring riffs of the 60s to electronica experiments, orchestral rock, and beyond, he followed his instincts without apology. His discography reads less like a catalog and more like a map of where the electric guitar could go, when held in the right hands. Jeff Beck wasn't just a rock legend, he was a man of depth, mystery, and refinement. Someone who chose to let his guitar do most of the talking while quietly surrounding himself with the things that brought him peace and inspiration. His final years were spent not on a flashy Hollywood hill or a neon-lit boulevard, but at River Hall, a historic Grade II Fortran listed estate nestled in the rolling countryside of Wadhurst, East Sussex. It wasn't merely a home, it was a soulful retreat where music, craftsmanship, and nature lived in harmony. Wadhurst, with its population of fewer than 5,000, is a place where the air is cleaner, the stars are brighter, and the pace of life is just slow enough to savor. And River Hall, steeped in architectural heritage, offered the perfect backdrop for someone like Beck. a man who valued the timeless over the trendy. The estate exuded the kind of quiet grandeur that doesn't need to boast, surrounded by lush greenery and centuries-old stonework. It was a home that whispered stories rather than shouted status. Here, Beck didn't just live, he thrived. He tinkered with his beloved collection of vintage cars, welcomed friends like Johnny Depp for long conversations and impromptu jam sessions, and found joy in the simple moments away from the chaos of touring and public attention. River Hall became an intimate creative haven. It was the place where riffs were born, ideas flowed freely, and collaborations unfolded naturally. Depp, more than just a friend, was part of that world. Two artists drawn together not by fame, but by a shared love of storytelling, craftsmanship, and the uncommon. Beck's wife, Sandra Cash, added her own layer of warmth and soul to River Hall. Together, they built a life of quiet beauty and gentle rhythm, a contrast to the frenzied pulse of Beck's decades-long music career. One photo from 2006 captures them at home, relaxed, content, at peace, standing in the very place that became their sanctuary. It's a moment frozen in time, a glimpse into a life that few ever got to see. The town of Wadhurst itself, once named the best place to live in the UK, mirrors the essence of River Hall. With its blooming countryside, tight-knit community, local cinema nights, and a schedule of social gatherings that could fill a village calendar, it's a place that welcomes you with a smile and keeps you grounded in the real. Beck wasn't just a celebrity in Wadhurst. He was a neighbor, a presence, someone who quietly became part of the town's rhythm. Even though the finer details of River Hall remain respectfully private, its spirit is clear. It was a home for a man who never stopped evolving, even after reaching the highest peaks of his craft. Jeff Beck wasn't just a wizard with 6 strings. He was also a full-throttle, chrome-loving car aficionado with a particular soft spot for classic American hot rods and vintage rides. His passion for engines and exhausts ran just as deep as his love for feedback and frets. One jewel that stood out in Beck's garage was the Chevrolet Corvette C1. This wasn't just a car. It was a declaration of American innovation from the golden era of the 1950s and early 60s. With sweeping curves, gleaming chrome, and a thumping V8 under the hood, the C1 was more than transportation. It was performance sculpted into art. For Beck, who revered design as much as he did tone, this Corvette wasn't just a piece of nostalgia. It was a celebration of speed and style with soul. But Beck didn't stop at the early classics. He also embraced the evolution of the Corvette, owning a later model version that carried the same bold American DNA, but with sharper edges, louder growls, and even more attitude. Like his shift from blues to jazz fusion, the newer Corvette spoke to his hunger for edge and innovation. Whether he was winding through the countryside or simply revving it in his garage, this modern beast proved Beck's taste remained as sharp as ever. Then there's the 1932 Ford, legendary in the Idritoires, hot rod universe and practically sacred in Beck's world. Often dubbed the Deuce Coupe, the 32 Ford isn't just a car. It's a blank canvas for those who see mechanics as a form of artistry. And Beck was no mere admirer. He was a master builder. His garage became a living museum of customized 32 Fords, each meticulously restored or wildly reimagined in a variety of colors and styles. These weren't just collector's items. They were personal statements, each one a harmony of metal and horsepower, riffing on the culture of speed and rebellion that hot rods represent. For Jeff Beck, cars weren't just a hobby. They were another outlet for his creativity, another stage where he performed without amps or spotlights. Jeff Beck's life was a constant dance between the spotlight and the shadows. On stage, his guitar screamed, wailed, whispered, and soared. Offstage, his personal world was quieter, marked by long relationships, fast cars, and a deep connection to the countryside he called home. His first marriage, to Patricia Brown, began in 1963, when Beck was still navigating the uncertain waters of early fame. But by the time the Yardbirds came calling, the bond had frayed. Fame, as it often does, widened the distance. During his stormy time with the Yardbirds, he began a relationship with American model and actress Mary Hughes, and the two moved in together when his ties with the band began to unravel. Yet it wasn't long before a new chapter began, more enduring and intimate. By 1968, Beck had entered a relationship with English model Celia Hammond, whose elegant portrait would grace the cover of his debut solo album, Truth. Their romance lasted nearly 18 years, a rare stretch of stability in a life full of restless evolution. In 2005, long after the last embers of his earlier relationships had cooled, Beck married Sandra Cash. It was a quiet union without tabloid fanfare, but one that gave him the peace and companionship he seemed to crave. He never had children, but his life was far from empty. He poured his soul into music, into the wild countryside of East Sussex, and into the finely tuned engines of his beloved hot rods. At Riverhall, a Grade II listed building in Wadhurst, Beck lived surrounded by nature, classic cars, and the woman he loved. A vegetarian since 1969, Beck also lent his support to animal welfare causes, serving as a patron of the Folly Wildlife Rescue Trust. Then, suddenly and without warning, came the end. On January 10, 2023, Jeff Beck passed away at the age of 78, succumbing to a bacterial meningitis infection at a hospital near his beloved Riverhall. The shock reverberated instantly across the music world. Jimmy Page, his old Yardbirds bandmate and lifelong admirer, was among the first to mourn. The six-stringed warrior is no longer here for us to admire the spell he could weave around our mortal emotions. Jeff could channel music from the ethereal, his technique unique, his imaginations apparently limitless. Jeff, I will miss you along with your millions of fans. Mick Jagger echoed the loss with a simple truth. We have lost a wonderful man and one of the greatest guitar players in the world. And Ronnie Wood, with whom Beck had once carved out some of rock's most powerful moments, said, "Now Jeff has gone, I feel like one of my band of brothers has left this world." Beck's funeral took place on February 3rd at St. Mary's Church in Beddington, the very same part of Sutton where his story began decades earlier. The pews were filled with faces that had shaped music itself. Johnny Depp, Rod Stewart, Eric Clapton, Tom Jones, Ronnie Wood, David Gilmour, Bob Geldof, Robert Plant, Chrissie Hynde. Jimmy Page stood up and delivered a eulogy, calling Beck the quiet chief, a man whose humility never masked the enormity of his talent. After the service, Beck was laid to rest in a private ceremony at Riverhall. Only Sandra, their loyal dog, and Johnny Depp were present. An intimate farewell for a man who had spent a lifetime communicating with the world, not through words, but through six strings, endless curiosity, and an instinct for beauty that transcended the ordinary.